the three intellectual faculties of the godly soul. Last week, if you recall, then we discussed in length that the main chiddush here, in a sense, is comprehending what it means that there's a heart, like the godly soul's heart, because usually our differentiation is that heart midot implies sense of self and like experiencing, as opposed to mochin, where which is bittul, because your mind is what you are focused on, something other than yourself. You're outside of yourself. But heart is indefinitely, it's essentially a self. So we discussed that last week to explain how truly the the heart of the godly soul, the midot of the godly soul, are implying something that's not experiential. You're not aware. You're not involved in your experience, which is obviously something very hard to to sense. Again, you can comprehend it. We gave all sorts of examples last time how very often a person is narrating his experience. He's not completely enveloped in what's happening. He's also there. He's present inside his experiences. That's the self of midot. But the godly soul is the opposite. The point where this is explained in great length is in Kundusait Palut. I think I mentioned that before as well. That the Mittler Rebbe's Kundusait Palut is where these things are explained in great length, relatively. So the description we're going to read now of the emotional attributes needs to be taken into consideration, that the true experience is actually not experiential. It's just something that is. It's not not a narrated experience. Again, there's an essential difference between the animal soul's experience and the godly soul's experience. The animal soul's experience is an experience of self. And the godly soul's experience, even the emotional experience, lacks self. So it's like a pure experience. It's being. It's not being involved in being. It's not doing something. And yourself isn't living. It's just actually being alive. It's actual life. But again, in order to explain it to ourselves, and we think with our animal soul, we think with ourself. We want to explain it to ourself. So we always need to translate this to more experiential examples that we're familiar with. So for me, if I say love or fear, so love or fear, in order to understand what love or fear mean, I need to step aside and narrate my love or narrate my fear. And actually what I'm describing is my myself, my selfness within the experience. So here there's a paradoxical topic, because we want to explain that paradoxical nature. We want to explain the midot, the emotions of the godly soul, which are a non-experiential experience. It's not something that you're narrating. So we'll read it inside. We'll see basically. We'll say one more thing. Throughout the book of Tanya, I think I mentioned this last week as well. In chapter 41, Mem Aleph and onwards, he describes very many levels of Ahava Vira. There are 9 chapters. This is the topic that he discusses, different angles of fear and love, and the different emotional faculties of your godly soul, of Avodat Hashem. And here, that's not the topic. Again, he's not looking to describe different levels of the service of Hashem, of Ahavat Hashem, of Yirat Hashem. He's just looking to describe the anatomy of the soul. Just like he described the essence of the godly soul, and then he described how the godly soul's mindly faculties are an expression of that essence. Now he wants to describe how the emotional faculties are also an expression of that essence. If you were to touch the phrases he uses here, the phrases used in the end of the book, then you'll see that specific loves. Again, at the end of Tanya, it's categorized very clearly, different levels, level, that level. Here, that's not the topic. But if we were to connect the words, and you'll see that the words he uses here are the words that later on he uses for the highest levels of the godly soul's love. Again, what is the difference between a level of love? Those chapters, chapter 41, those are 9 long chapters that need to be studied in detail. But in general, the difference between what we'd call a level of love is how much self is in it. How pure is it? How much of a pure expression of the godly soul is it? As opposed to how much of yourself is involved in it. Simply, the less self there is, the stronger the love, the stronger the purity of the godly soul's expression. But that's not completely true, because as he explains in the end of the book, and it's also mentioned here, we'll read it in a second, there's the other side to it, that sometimes the counterpart of your animal soul, your selfness being involved, enhances the intensity of your love. So I think we mentioned this last week as well a little bit when we spoke about ahava kerishvei esh, that the consumption of your animal soul is like a fuel to your godly soul. I think the example we used last week is that when we discussed how a person is constantly involved in his experiences, he's never completely in life. He's always narrating his life from outside. And then we mentioned that if you notice this about yourself, this tendency to constantly involve yourself in everything, then that tendency itself could become something that you're frustrated by, that you're that you hate. You hate that tendency, and that hating itself, that ferocity of how you use the word, the anger you have, like the frustrated anger you have of you towards yourself, fuels your drive as much as your love, even more than your love fuels your drive. But you hate finding yourself being so involved with yourself. So you want to, again, like we use this idiom very often, that if you're moving from point A to point B, then your speed is how fast you're going to point B. But part of your speed is also how fast you want to run away from point A. So there's 2 angles to your drive towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And also your self-involvement, as he explains later on in Tanya, even your bad tendencies also fuel your drive. Your frustration from your bad tendencies, your animosity, your will to exit your bad tendencies. And when I say bad tendencies here, I mean something very seminal, very basic, just that inherent tendency to always be involved, always involve yourself. So just like when we study it, when we describe it well, and a person thinks about it and notes, realizes that really his whole life is followed by a narration and self-involvement. It's frustrating. You don't want to be that way. That itself is also a love for Hashem. That's also a drive. The counter, the bouncing off your bad is also part of your good.
So can you say it's a catalyst for growth? You're using it as a catalyst for growth.
Yeah, you could say it that way. But he'll say that's in the continuation of the book. He calls that love of Hashem. It's a fiery love. A fiery love means it's something consumed. What's being consumed is your yeshus. But what does it mean your yeshus? Again, your yeshus is your wanting to remain yourself. Your tendency to always involve yourself. That's being consumed in your drive towards Hashem. So again, what's the bottom line? Any experience we describe will always have 2 sides to it. If it were just the godly soul, we couldn't describe it. It would just be being. So maybe we can think about that. We can understand that there's such a thing. But again, just like any experience you've gone through in life, if you can describe it, if you remember it, then there was some self-involvement. If you're in such an intense experience that you're completely carried away and you're completely living the reality at hand, then you really don't remember it. It's not, there was no lettering there. You were just completely there. So you wouldn't even have a clear recollection of the occurrence. So like you always say that as an example for bittul, we always say like a person, if you go to a wedding or a happy simcha and everybody's dancing and you get carried away, that's called bittul. You find yourself carried away in a big simcha. That's a good example for bittul. So, but if it's your own wedding, you might be so excited that you're so carried away that you don't even remember it. If it takes you completely, then you're actually part of the reality. You're no longer involved. Yourself is no longer involved. So truly, the godly soul's attributes, purity in their purity, are like that. They're completely enveloped in Hashem. So there's no self involved. Any description we want to describe of the emotional attributes of the godly soul is always already as part of the way the godly soul is garmented in yourself. It's part of your personality. If it wouldn't be that way, then there'd be nothing to narrate. There'd be no presence to describe. Okay, so now we'll read what he says about Ahava v'Yira. We reached Yira already, but we'll read the love first. We read last time. So actually, you remember exactly where we got to?
Yes, the line begins, so Fatachlis upachat Hashem belibo. It's about a little over, almost halfway down the page. And then Vishuv Yislahev.
So we skipped the hitboinenus. Oh no, we didn't. At the end, that's why we got only to this point. If you remember, we discussed the soiviv kol almin, memale kol almin. You need to contemplate the order of hitbonenut, of meditation on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is what I do understand and what I understand through that. What I don't understand until I connect to the Atzmus Hashem. We gave allegories about that, if you remember. And the result of this contemplation is what he says here. So we'll read it. V'shuvit lahev libo, ve'ava zaker ishvei yesh, v'chashika, v'chafetza, v'tshuka, v'nefesh shokeka, l'gdulat ensof baruch. Okay, so the first reaction, again, what's he describing? That love is the reaction of your contemplation. Like we described last week, if you go to, I think the example we said is like going to a class. So we said that memale kol almin is like what you do understand. You hear a beautiful voice, and if you're able to deepen your understanding to a realization, like from within that vort, wait, hold on 1 second. One second. Again, that if you can understand through the contemplation of what you do understand, like if you go to the Rav's class, or you go to a tzaddik. So what you do grasp, only if you're wise, you're intelligent, then you also realize that if the depth your understanding is only limited, and there's infinite more depth to what's being said, or the rabbi saying it, the teacher is infinitely smarter than what you understood. So your hitpa'alut, that's the word, you're impressed, your impression, the impression that leaves on you is much larger than what you did understand. So if I say a very interesting vort, you learn some sikha from the Rebbe or something, you learn a beautiful vort that relates exactly to your life. That impresses you very much, but if you're intelligent, then you understand that the wisdom of the Torah, that this is only a detail of, is infinitely larger. And that leaves a much bigger impression on you than the impression of the specific word. So that's like Malik kol almin, the soivev kol almin, what you do understand and what you understand that you don't understand, what you realize. Soivev kol almin is something you realize. You don't understand it, but you realize its existence. And kula kamei kalash chashiv, or the etzem, at the end, let's say you go to that tzaddik. So the tzaddik himself, he's not what you did understand, and he's not what you didn't understand. He's himself. So connecting itkashus to his self, like being carried away by the self behind all of these impressions, that's even higher. If you imagine such a situation, so like he says here, if you're impressed that way, then you find yourself attracted. It causes the reaction of such an impression is an attraction. That's called Ahavat Hashem. Now again, now you can see very clearly what we discussed before. The second you say attraction is already self-involved. There's someone being attracted. There's an experience here. So really, essentially, the godly soul's attraction is just what it's included in its source. But because the godly soul is embodied within myself, so it's clinging to its source is like a vacuum. It causes an attraction. So like a child's attracted to his parents, like a student's attracted to his rabbi. That's a simple example here. When I contemplate on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then I find myself attracted. For a chassid, the easiest example of it is like a tzaddik. If you're connected to a tzaddik, then there's something infinitely attractive about the tzaddik. You study his Torah, you understand his greatness, you don't understand. You understand what you understand. You realize his greatness. That's the soiver. And it ignites immediately an attraction. Like you can see technically, if a tzaddik comes into a room, everybody is attracted. It's like a magnet. Everybody just wants to cling to it. Because there's something exalted. Same thing here. The more you realize, you contemplate on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's exaltance, the more you want to cling to him. Now, when he'll describe the clinging, then he'll say that part of that for us is a consumption of self. That simultaneously with my will to cling to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I also want to release my cling to myself. I want to stop being so clinging to myself. Stop sticking my fingernails in the ground, which is it's breaking or stopping or slowing down my attraction. Yeah.
It's interesting that the three words the Alter Rebbe picks here, b'chashika, b'chafitza, utshuka, are in Chumash describing Shechem's love for Dinah.
Yeah, fair. I never noticed that. Who noted that? You just noticed that?
I know it's Y.Y. Jacobson mentioned it.
Fair. So I mean, it doesn't appear. Do I need to open the Chumash? It doesn't appear there as a.
It does. When his father comes to speak to Yaakov, check it out next year's Tzitzis.
Yeah, fair. And all three phrases.
And it might also be Nefesh Shokeka, that I don't remember.
And all three of these phrases.
Right, because you could say which is the love that's most described in all of the relations in Chumash, and it's the love of Shechem for Dinah. It's very, it's always a surprise for people to find that out.
Interesting.
If you asked which,
So to me, it was always simple that these phrases. First of all, Tanya in Bechal Chabad is full of three phrases all the time. This is like a typical Chabad phrasing is to put three phrases. Obviously, I don't know if you studied before, the Rav has classes he gave maybe 30 years ago on Tanya. And the whole class, he's taught all of Tanya. It was just a contemplation of the different triplets of Tanya and explaining what they imply, what the order of each, taking the three phrases, corresponding them to Chokhmah Bina Dat, which one corresponds to which, and then explaining the order. If it's Dat Bina Chokhmah, Chokhmah Bina Dat, what is that implying? So distinctly, like by far, most common concoction is the concoction of Hod. Hod is glory, lachna. That's the most common concoction. That's a topic. So these three phrases, to me, I don't know if this is true, but always seemed to me that he punned it off of the Orach Chaim. There's a very famous Orach Chaim of Nadav Avihu, where he goes on and on. He also uses these phrases of how excited and how clinging and how in love they were for HaKadosh Baruch Hu when they entered Kodesh HaKodashim and passed away. The sin of Nadav Avihu. So the Orach Chaim, he has a very famous, beautiful caption there where he describes their dveikus in Hashem. And these are the phrases that he uses there.
Mm.
So and there's a known connection between Chassidus and the Orach Chaim. The Baal Shem Tov was very connected.
Mm-hmm.
And it pretty much goes without saying that the Alter Rebbe was familiar with this caption. So to me, it was always munach in my head that that's what he's taking this from the Orach Chaim. Even though obviously I've never seen any source for that. But if you say that in the story of Dinah, all three of these phrases appear, that's surprised. I'll look into it. So that's how he phrases the attraction that's birthed from the clinging. So the actual clinging is the mind, where I put myself in the topic I'm studying. But that attraction causes an attraction of myself. And that's all these words here. Chashika, chafitza, tshuka, nefesh shokika legdulat ensof baruch hu. He klota nefesh. Now, so all of this attraction is actually an attraction. It's like a suicidal attraction. The phrase in Chassidus is klota nefesh. Klota nefesh means, and how do you say klota nefesh in English? I have no idea.
Expiring of the soul.
Expiring. That's how they translate it.
I don't have a translation in front of me, but that's how it's usually translated.
Klot means extinguishing. That's the phrase.
Here it says a consuming passion of the soul.
Yeah, but again, the word klot means a consumption up until extinguishment, a complete consumption. It's like if the oil in the candle is burned ad kalot, that means that it's burned dry. It's burned out completely. So that's what he says here. What are you attracted to? You're attracted to a complete loss of self. You're attracted out of yourself. So the godly soul, as far as the godly soul is considered, what your animal soul, so yourself, is just captivating it. And even though, again, if there were no self here, we wouldn't be able to phrase any of this. But nonetheless, what I'm experiencing is an attraction to cling to what I'm attracted to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the tzaddik, whatever we discuss. And that attraction is actually a drive to extinguish myself. So it's a drive towards extinction of self. Again, it's not that I'm looking for that extinguishment. I'm just looking to cling. I'm looking to cling even though it will extinguish myself. Nonetheless, I couldn't care less. I even want it. My lack of extinguishment, now that I'm not yet extinguished, is frustrating. It's part of my drive to step out of myself. So that's what he says here. So all of this attraction is ad kedei klot hanefesh. כי דכתיב נחשפה וגם קלטה נפשי. וכתיב צמאה נפשי לאלוקים, וכתיב צמאה לך נפשי. So he brings 3 quotations when this is mentioned. There's a lot of mefarshim.
From
To correspond each one of the verses, but we're not going to dwell on it. וגם והצמאון מיסוד האש שבנפש האלוקית. So, I don't know why he says all of this. I've read a lot of mefarshim. I don't know why he says it. I'll tell you what I think, what I studied it when I studied it. I remember. I didn't see anybody explaining why he mentions this. So I don't know what to say. I don't know what like the official perush is here. I don't know. I didn't see anybody. To everybody, it seemed like a normal sentence. None of the mefarshim I read notes anything here. And the Rebbe has a note here, but the Rebbe's note is a technical note about the quotation from the Arizal. It's written in our versions. The Arizal is written differently. It's a technical note. But on the content here, why is it important to the Alter Rebbe to say the thirst of the godly soul is fire, and the element of fire is in the heart? What I think he's saying is he wants to express why the godly soul's love is what can consume yourself. That's what he's saying. Because the love is in the heart, which is the self, and the godly soul's self is the consumption of your sense of self. And that's why he wants to say that this is like, as is known, that the fire is in the heart. That's what he says here. כמו שכתוב בטבעים, וכך הוא בעץ חיים, שיסוד האש הוא בלב, ומקור המים והלחות מהמוח. The mind is being, right? That's like a settled, and the mind's contemplation isn't fiery. Why isn't fiery? Because there's no self there. It's just envelopment. But the heart is consuming your sense of self. That's why it's a fiery love. An attraction is a fiery love because you're attracted from something. And there's a process of consuming what's captivating you. Whereas your mind is being enveloped in what you're contemplating on, and there's no consumption there. So it's a watery love. It's a settled love. It's like being, again, you're enveloped in the topic. Like you're watching a movie, so you're completely enveloped. But the heart is an attraction from yourself. So it's fiery, it's consuming your sense of self. That's how I understood this. He wants to explain why Davka, the heart of the godly soul, is what's consuming yourself, because the heart is the element of fire, which is a consuming fiery love. That's how I always understood this. וכמו שכתבו התהילים, כך הוא בעץ חיים, שיסוד האש הוא בלב, מקור המים והלחות מהמוח, כמו שכתוב בעץ חיים שער הנון. שהיא מבחינת חוכמה, שנקרא מים שבנפש האלוקית. Period. Now that's the love and fear. ושאר המידות כולן, we know there are 6 or 7 emotional attributes. He only mentions 2 of them. And he doesn't, again, like I said, this is not the topic here, so he doesn't go on to explain Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, even though in the beginning of the chapter he did mention Tiferet. He said Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, if you recall. And here he only mentions Chesed, Gvura. So, I don't know if that's a kushia, but why he does that. Simply, again, Chesed and Gvura this is explained in many places in Chassidus, that they are the main faculties of the heart. Again, love is attraction, fear is deterrence, and your right and left hand are what balance out all of the rest of your emotional concoction. All of the other attributes of confidence, compassion, they are all a concoction of love and fear. So that's what he says here. Shara midot kulam hin anfei, they're branches of the fear and love, and their offspring. Moshe katuv makom acher. So that's about the heart. Now the last topic he discusses is dat. So as we know, dat is positioned in the mind. So it's between the mind and the heart, but he skipped it, and now he's going back to it. He says like this, והדעת מלשון והאדם ידע את חווה, והוא לשון התקשרות והתחברות. So the word da'at comes from the word knowing. The word to know something means to connect to it. In English, it also works, I think, but you need a sense for it. If you know something, knowledge is like, knowledge is very cold. Knowledge can be something very technical. But knowing something is not just acquiring knowledge. Knowing something means connecting to that knowledge, diving into what you know. So that's what he says here. The example he brings is this word da'at is what's the word used to describe intercourse between Adam and Chava. That knowing someone means to connect to him. It's like if I ask you, do you know somebody? So what do I mean? Do you know him? So it's not just I know. If I know about him as well. I ask you if you know him. I mean, do you know him better than me? Can you tell me something about him? How deep is your connection to that person? That means, do you know him? I don't know him so well. I don't really know him. But you do know him. So knowing is connected. That's also physical. That's the phrase the Torah uses for a physical connection, is that Adam knows Chava. Adam yada et Chava ishto. V'hu lashon itkashrut v'itchabut. And the phrase means to connect. Itkashrut, to cling and connect. Now, what is this in your mindly faculties? שמקשר דעתו בקשר אמיץ וחזק מאוד, ויתקע מחשבתו בחוזק בגדולת אינסוף ברוך הוא, ואינו מסיח דעתו. He says that the ability for your mindly faculties to focus on something, on HaKadosh Baruch Hu here is talking. So they depend, like all of this process I described, depends on the contemplation being a penetrating, long contemplation. If I don't devote myself strongly to the topic, I don't connect to it strongly, then myself won't be birthed from the topic. I'll remain within myself. Like to breed. What happens? I intellectualize about something, and if I concentrate strongly on what I'm contemplating, then the contemplation breeds its emotion, and that becomes a fiery, consuming attraction, vacuuming myself into the contemplation. But if I don't contemplate strongly, so it doesn't breed anything into myself, it doesn't breed anything into me. Like if I study, if I think about that you tell me a story about Hashgacha Pratit, right? You come to a Farbrengen and somebody's speaking very, very lebendig, very strong. So if I take it very informatively, I don't connect to what he's saying. I don't penetrate what's being said. So it remains informative. Okay, what did they talk about? He said that once he missed the bus and then this and that. And that. It's very technical. But if you penetrate, if you connect very strongly to what's being said, then slowly but surely the topic you're contemplating on breeds reactions. It starts birthing your heart. So if you're contemplating on a person, and you think about this person very, very strongly, very deeply, at length, then you start breeding an attraction, and yourself starts being attracted into what you're studying. That attraction depends on the connection with your mindly contemplation. Just like physically, the dot is what the intercourse, the connection is what enables breeding offspring. So the offspring here, as we mentioned, is the emotional faculties. So they're only bred when there's a connection. There has to be a strong connection with the topic at hand. And if you very strongly connect, like an avoider, you come to Verbringen, there's an avoider to take it seriously, to listen, and to focus deeply on what's being said, on the depth of what's being said, and to relate it to yourself. And if you do that, if you sit seriously and you listen and you think about it, then it automatically starts breeding reactions. Yourself starts being attracted to the topic, and it consumes you. So the emotions that are happening there, like the result, let's say the result of the story being told in the Verbringen is faith. So you find yourself, your emotions being attracted and consumed into faith. That's only if you're connected very strongly. If you're studying a topic very technically and it remains something like completely cold and detached from you, then you can understand it, all the information, you can remain informative without it breeding anything into yourself. So that is the intercourse. It's like it's connecting with the topic. And only then does this whole process that we described occur. There's a heart is bred as an attraction into the topic at hand. So that's what he says here. שמקשר דעתו בקשר אמיץ וחזק מאוד, brave and strong, very, very strong words here. You have to fiercely penetrate your mind, a strong, fierce contemplation. מחשבתו בחוזק בגדולת אינסוף ברוך הוא, ואינו מסיח דעתו, not to allow yourself to be sidetracked. And it's like you go to Verbringen, there's a lot of avoid. You believe that whatever everybody's speaking, they're speaking to you, directly to you. You have to concentrate very strongly. Even someone who's very intelligent about this topic at hand, the Kadosh Baruch Hu's greatness. Informatively, he knows a lot. Still, if he won't connect his thought and penetrate strength with a lot of strength, and hatmada is indulgence, like a continuous penetration of your thoughts, then again it will remain, it won't breed a heart. Lo yulid benafsho yira ve'ava amitim, ki im dimyonot shav. Now, what can come of this? What can come of it is that you have delusionary emotions. What's delusionary emotion? Delusionary emotion means that yourself reacts. Again, not that you breed a new emotion into yourself, which is actually consuming yourself. It's the opposite. Yourself, instead of your mind swallowing your heart, attracting your heart takes advantage of your mind. You gained an insight, and now you can toy with it within yourself. It becomes part of yourself. Instead of yourself becoming part of what you're contemplating on, instead of being sucked into the topic, you suck the topic into you. That's what he calls delusionary love. So if I hear a nice word and I relate it to myself, then I can feel all sorts of excitements, but they're all part of my sense of self. There's there's nothing other than me that I'm being sucked into. But if I contemplate on the study strongly, like we discussed before, so much so that through my understanding, I have a realization of the exaltance of the Torah itself. And from there, I have itkashus to the tzaddik telling the Torah. So that breeds an attraction to step out of myself. It's not something that myself gains. It's a forgetfulness of self. That's a true emotion. That's what he calls a true emotion, because it's an emotion of your godly soul, of your other soul, carrying you out of yourself. If you don't concentrate very, very strongly, then the emotions you experience aren't being bred from your godly soul. They're just yourself, what you think about. So you're just experiencing yourself. That's a very, like in Chabad, this is like the worst thing you can do. This is very derogatory external experience. So I don't know, you hear like a nice song and some spiritual experience, and you have you have butterflies in your belly, and you call it avodas Hashem. So all you're doing is you're only cultivating your sense of self. It's very, very bad. And it's delusionary, and it won't last. There's no love for Hashem there. It's just part of your love for yourself, and you were exposed to a certain content, so that yourself is experienced in that context now. You're experiencing yourself in the context of spirituality, but you're not experiencing Hashem. You're not, in order for your experience to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu's love, you need to devote your concentration very, very strongly to Hashem's presence, for that to penetrate you and breed something within you. If not, then all you're doing is experiencing yourself in a certain context, which is the opposite of Avat Hashem. That's what he calls delusionary emotions. This is why hadat ukiyum amidot v'chayutan. This is why the dat is the existence and the vitality of your heart, because the dat is what enables the mind to breed, to birth a true heart. That's why the dat has both sides to it. It has the hey gvuot, hey chasadim. It has also the element of love and the elements of fear in it, because it's the soul. In the words of the Zohar, it's the key. The Zohar calls that maftecha de kali ushit, the key to all 6 attributes of the heart. So here he calls it the soul of the heart. It's also mishmeta de zah. That's also a phrase in Kabbalah. The soul, the dat is the soul of zah. It's the vitality of the heart. Because again, without that, you don't breed a heart at all. There's no living heart at all.
Why Zah and not including Malchus? Why not Zun?
Okay, in general, it's not, the heart is only Zah, not Zun. Malchus is Levushe HaNefesh. It's Chochom B'Yadat. Very often, Malchus is counted with Zah, but then if you study there in depth, you'll see that it's discussing the Ateret HaYesod, the bottom of Yesod, the Malchut of the Yesod, not the actual Malchus. The actual Malchus, Shechina, is always Levushe HaNefesh.